Hey! Welcome back to the channel, welcome back to Wildlands, and welcome to the start of the end for the riverbanks area. And that is going to begin with the construction of our Asian elephant house, which we're going to tackle in today's video. And we're going to follow it up with a part 2, and you'll see why, where we tackle the outer areas and all of the external habitat. Now, it's going to be quite a long episode today, so ensure you're sitting comfortably, and let's go. So to start off, we're going to spend a little moment just sketching out the area of where we're going to build the outside habitat. But today we are not going to touch the outside at all. But well, maybe a little bit, mainly because that's going to be part 2, because I actually wanted to spend quite a bit of time building the main building. And lo and behold, as you can probably see from the runtime of this video, it did take quite a bit of time to build. However, such a huge part of that was me putting together detailing on stone. So I'm going to spare you the fun of watching all that happen, and we're going to jump through it hopefully at a nice quick pace. So to kick us off, I'm going to grab a copy of the tower that we've built for the top of our water buffalo and rhino wetlands habitat. That is on the workshop for anybody interested. I'm going to change it to a slightly lighter colour because I've noticed things are getting a little bit dark, and we're going to start building off the bottom of this using the Indonesian brick wall. Now that we've got that set, we can start laying out our paths, and we're going to lay out the building framework first. And to start, we're going to make sure that we've got a place for the guests to walk into the building, go right up the middle of it, but also we've got to make sure we leave a little bit of space to get our keeper gate in. I've done this before where I forgot to put the barriers in, and it's an absolute nightmare to fix later on, so we're going to get that placed nice and early. With the path down, that kind of gives us a great starting point for the size, so we can start building out. Now I want a sort of tower element for the entrance, and that's why we've copied over this big dome. So we're going to build out from that to start with. We're going to support it, make it look like it's, I am using a bit of an inspiration, but make it look like it's supported well, and this does follow in line with the inspiration. Then we're going to continue backwards, and what I've actually done is I want this to be a faux building, a faux older building, and it's then going to merge into a much more utilitarian modern building with breeze blocks and corrugated metal, and you can see this on the back end here. Now you won't be able to see this from the front because it'll be covered over, but once you go into the building, I want it still to feel a little bit more modern. It is a brand new building, and it's one of our big showcase buildings, so we want it to be nice and up to date. Once we've got the overall framework of the building set out, we can then just jump back to the front and start mapping out where we're going to put in our doors and our windows, getting a bit of the height elevations in there, and then just making sure that our building's the right sort of size. With that done, we can move on to getting some more of the intricate details done. A lot of this time was spent moving stone pieces around to get the right look. And as I say, I was using Karma architecture or Khmer architecture from Cambodia as an inspiration. And there's a lot of detailing on them, and I've tried to incorporate that through some of the last habitats that we did. This time, I want to stick mainly just to some nice flat rectangular surfaces and get the detailing in with the little Indonesian stone elements like the flowers and some of the spiral. To give us a platform for that though, we need to get the initial stonework on the front of our tower complete. I'm going to use these edging strips for that. As you can see there, they've got a nice little bit of detail on them already, and it gives us a nice flat surface for us to build onto. Now as we go through the video and as we go through the build, you'll see these detailings used quite a bit. I'm not going to point them out every time. Generally, I've used every single one of the Indonesian detailing sort of patterny things somewhere on this building, and you'll be able to see them as we go around. But all of them have been coloured to the same colour as the stone. They clip together quite nicely, and they just work really, really well. Now another bit of detailing I've done is I brought over that pot or stacked bucket motif, as I would call it, that we used on our walls and some of the other habitat edging. Just going to create a little bit of a bit on the side of our tower here just for them to sit in. It did look a little bit too neat, so I then went back and just started breaking them, so pulling the odd one or two out so it looked like they'd fallen off, and I think that gave the look a much better in keeping with the surrounding. Now, when I first wanted to look at getting a doorway set up, I had in my mind that there was, for some reason, some paintable tiles within Planet Zoo, and I could not find them. I am so deadly sure they're in there somewhere, but I absolutely could not find them. So instead, I went for the Indonesian painted wood, which I wasn't even aware was there. But if you set it as the same colour as the stone, and then add in some more stone elements around it, some of the other Indonesian brick walls, some of the big chunky blocks, they do kind of blend in really well as a carved stone. The final result is actually really good, more than I ever imagined it would be at least. Now, it was by this point I was getting a little bit bored of moving stone around, so I thought I'd go move more stone around and do the walls. But this time I'm going to grab some of the walls that we made when we started the riverbanks area, and I've kept them all in a pile off to one side. And this is a great example of where keeping what you make, or keeping a copy of what you make, over to one side, or even blueprinting it, is a great idea when you're building a whole zoo. These I can just replicate without having to rebuild because they were a painstaking build to begin with, and I wouldn't want to have to do it over and over and over again. Now, I'm going to hold my hands up at this point and say that this door was a bit of a gamble. I did not realise you could not change the wood colour in the middle of the door until just about now. And as a result, I thought, well, we could start again or we could just roll with it. And actually, it looked kind of good, so I kept it in there. But to hide the staff path that is going through it, and this staff path is going to go round to our staff area that we have on the reverse that we made when we remade our entrance, this needed a bit of a floor. So we're going to make that using the same method I've done in the past, where we take the limestone pillar bases, make them into a patio style, and then sink a bit of cement underneath them just to give them a darker grout. To further detail those path edges, we're going to bring in some decals, more the mossy decals. And at this stage, it looks a bit of a mess, but don't worry, much like the building, this is one of those things where you just need to keep adding things and eventually it turns into something good. One of those things, of course, being the plants. And again, because I was taking a quick break from doing more of the building, I thought I'd get all this area planted up. We're going to reuse a lot of the plants that we've used in the riverbanks area in the habitats that surround our new Asian habitat. One little trick I stumbled onto fairly recently is mixing in the hedgerow additions from the barnyard pack. While I don't like them on their own for creating hedges, if you mix them in with the creosote bushes, they add a nice little bit of a highlight to that much darker foliage. Additionally, a lot of the riverbanks area has leaves scattered everywhere, and one thing I really need to get into the habit of doing is creating mess. One thing that adds a great element of realism to the zoo is not having everything pristine and tidy. So the use of decals and the use of these scattered leaves makes such a difference, and I really think I need to use them a lot more. As always, our favourite weed, the hosta, returns, and then we're going to bring in the creosote bushes just to fill in all of that empty space. Now, I was feeling pretty happy with the result by this point. We will come back and do a bit more later on, but it was time to get back to the build. And we're going to start off by putting down the roof on our lower section. Now, I'm going to reuse the painted tile roof, as it's pretty much the only older style roof that we have, at least in a stone tile. I have turned the grids off using free build. You can use the grids for this if you're going to try and recreate something like this. This just allowed me to nudge it into the places I wanted it to sit. I then lined up on the front some more trim just to cover over the edges, and we are going to line the inside of the walls so you won't see the back of these once the building is completed. But for now, it just allows us to tidy up a lot of that edge and stop the roof just floating above the wall. Once we got the roof in place, we changed it to the same colour that we've used elsewhere. Now, I will come back a bit later on and add a bit more patterning. However, at this point, again, for a little bit of a change of scenery, we've jumped to the front. I did find these European elephant signs, which are made of metal, and they work really well when you sink them into stone. I'm so happy with this front entrance. I'm not even going to put a name on the building. I was going to name the building. I think I'm just going to leave it empty now. As mentioned, inside we're going to clad the walls, and I was going to do it in plaster originally, but I thought, we'll paint the brick. So I've gone for a lighter colour, so it feels a little bit more cleaner, a little bit more modern, but we're still going to keep the Indonesian brick, and we're just going to sort of squish them into the walls so that they cover over all of the little bits that are poking through. Returning back up to the roof, it was at this point everything was looking a little dark, and my original plan was to put windows in the roof line. That's why it was flat originally. However, instead what I've done is I've ran another set of roofs, added on some trim, and then I'm going to go around the back from the area that you can't see from the front and put in some skylights. And we're going to do this in the old roof here and also in the new roof a little bit later on. We're going to colour these the same colour as the surrounding framework so that they look like they were built into the roof, but obviously in reality this building would not have had skylights put into it. Now, a little detail that only you who got this far in the video will see is the fact that we have actually put in a drainage system for this roof. This is going to go all the way down where the old and new building meet. It will never be used, it will never be seen, but I felt like running something down there made sense. And then to cover that join up inside, we're going to use a metal beam. Now again, the idea being is that when the guests are inside the building, you don't need this beam here. I could have just ran the ceiling off the side of it, but if this was an older building and it had been repurposed, or if it had been built first and then extended, you would expect some form of joining system, and that's kind of what that represents, and I think it adds, again, just an element of realism. Now, turning our attention to the floor, we're going to do a much bigger version of the patio that we did outside, but we're going to use the pillar bases for this as they're much wider. This is only going to cover the area that the guests can walk on, and the idea is this would be a lot cleaner than the more concrete floor that we have inside the habitat, and this is just going to cover everywhere that there's path. And then once we've got that marked out, we can start putting in just plain concrete slabs. I do go back and turn these a little bit more of a warmer taupe colour. I don't like the grey concrete that the game has, and I can imagine that after being used as an animal shelter for quite a while, it would not stay a pristine grey. Now, we're not going to concrete the entire building towards the back. We're going to fill it full of dirt. I'm going to make a little pond or watering hole for the elephants to use. The idea of this building is it can be used during the winter or when the weather's not particularly suitable for the elephants, so that they can pretty much live inside if needed. And we're going to blend that join of the two areas together by just bringing the terrain up and over the edge of the concrete. We'll come back later on and add some more stuff for them to play and interact with as well. Jumping back up to the roof, now that we've done the majority of the inside flooring, we can start putting on the newer roof, which is the corrugated plastic. I'm still a little bit annoyed we don't have a modular or a grid-based corrugated metal roof. Seems like a missed trick, but this will do. And then we're going to put in some more skylights, because again, we need a lot more light at the back there. As you can see, that finishes off the roof, and inside we've got some pretty good light. Nothing majorly bright, but it's not too dark. We can help that along with a bit of lighting later on. Now, I'd been putting off going back to the front of the tower and finishing off the front of the building for a while now, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. It was time to get in some more detailing. I did want a bit of light down this end as well. The guests won't be able to get all the way over here, but they will be able to see the elephants going in and out of this entrance. So I'm going to put in a skylight, and we're going to use the classical glass for that as well. I do get some more detailing on the roof later on to hide this, so it doesn't look as modern. Keep an eye out in the end cinematics, so you'll be able to see what I did there. As for the rest of the holes on the building, it was time to get some windows sorted, and I'm actually going the extra bit of effort to make sure that the windows make sense on this build. So each pane of glass has got its own framework, it's got its own little bits of stone that hold it in place, and it gave a really weird sort of, I guess you could probably call it like a country house style feel to it. The only thing I didn't like about this particular window was, if you look closely, there was that joint where the glass is. So to get around that and distract your eye, we're also going to put in some handrails in front of it. And again, we're bringing back the apparently very useful zookeeper pole that, despite me constantly saying how much I don't like it, I've used it in every build since it's come out. So clearly I'm lying. And then we're going to jump down the other end of the building and put in more windows. This took a while. It was a lot of moving of stone around, so I'm not going to force you through all of that, but you can see some of the results. With that out of the way, it's time to fix up the final two holes on the front of the building, and that is our entrance and exit for the elephants. In order to keep the doors in keeping with the building, we're going to make two ways of getting in and out. There's going to be a couple of metal rods that slide out the side of the beams there to close it off to stop elephants pushing their way through. And then we're going to do a more traditional roller gate that the keepers can pull across. Elephants in general get a lot more interaction with keepers than a lot of the animals in the zoo, so we're not going to go too high-tech or remote action as we would in a lot of the other habitats. This is just going to be more in keeping with the building. And to do that, we're going to start off with a green wood sort of gate, which we're just going to build out of the stained timber. I want it to have a nice curved top to it. We don't really have that many curved wooden pieces in the game, so I did need to use this curved painted Japanese wood, which I've never used before. Luckily, the darker green meant that you don't notice the two different types of wood being used together, and it kind of works. Just to keep it in, we're going to add a bit more of that trim, a bit more of that detail to it, which if we colour green, you can barely tell is meant to be stone, and it looks just like it blends in with the wood. Now, to stop them falling inwards, we're going to make a nice rail system for them to roll across. And again, the zookeeper pole comes in clutch for that. I'm just going to run that along the front of the two doors and just at the right height for the doors to sort of hook onto it. And then finally, when they are open, we need a way of protecting them against pesky elephant trunks. So we're going to build ourselves a couple of fences, and if you've missed out on any of the elephant builds I've done in the past, most of the larger animals like this will climb up a horizontal or vertical fence. So we're going to put them in at a diagonal, and this just stops them being able to clamber up them. Plus it kind of looks a bit cooler, at least I think so. To support the roof, we're going to bring in a couple of concrete poles, but just to cover them over. We're going to use the almost infamous Planet Zoo log, as they look amazing. And these just sort of sit over the top of the poles and make it a little bit more decorative. And then to build a guest barrier, we're going to do something we did in another riverbanks habitat, again, the Wetlands habitat, where we made a vine encrusted fence. We're going to do another version of that, but rather than just copy it, I'm going to build it from scratch because I want it all to be fairly unique. So it's basically these African branches with the liana vines wrapped around them. I'm going to run that pretty much anywhere that the guests can get to. This won't keep any elephants in, but it's certainly there just to sort of say to the guests, don't clamber through me. And as you can see, we've ran that everywhere and it makes a nice little decorative fence. However, to keep the elephants in place, we are going to build something a little bit more structurally safe. And we're going to reuse the zookeeper rope, which is brand new and makes a great cable. Colour it a metal colour and then add in a hinge just to attach it to. Replicate that a couple of times and we get this wonderful little wire fence that means that the elephants can't get all the way through, but they can still have a little bit of interaction with the guest. Again, we're just going to run that behind every other fence that we've got in here just to keep the elephants safe and keep them away from the guest directly. Now, the way the tower worked out meant we had this little alcove, and I thought what better than to put in the elephant statue because it fits so well. Later on, I will light this up with a spotlight and it looks really, really good. Keep an eye out on the cinematics for that one. Jumping over to the sandier area, we're going to put some logs into the ground for the elephants to play with. And then we're going to build in a mud pit, colouring the ground around it, making sure the texture works. You've seen me do this about 10 to 50 times before, but it always works really well when you do a bit of extra care with it. I'm just going to pop down a couple of toys for them to play with. Over on the concrete, we're going to put in some areas of the straw. Again, dropping that terrain down when it drags it out the floor. And then finishing off with a small feed station. Again, we'll do a lot more outside, but for now this is just so that they can be kept indoors. Where we can, we're going to put in some hose pipes as well as some electrical sockets. I always forget the electrical socket and I really need to do it more, so I'm kind of making the effort to get them in. I've also popped down some billboards which won't have anything on this time, but next time when we fully open it up, we will get these full of information about all of our elephants. Nearing the home straight now, I wanted to do just a little bit of planting. I didn't want to do an episode without some planting. So we're going to create a small dry moat on the entranceway in. This is going to have a little fence and it lets the people see into the enclosure. For now, all they'll see is our diggers working away in the background as the outside is yet to be built. This just gives us a little peek through. To do that, we've sunk in some concrete walls. We're going to use the dynamic mossy rocks to make a border. I'm also going to bring in some temperate rocks just to mix in. After all, we are in a temperate environment. And you can imagine that the mossy rocks will have been brought in, but these are just going to be found in the ground as they're digging away. We're going to create another rope fence, again the exact same way we did inside. This time we're going to keep the rope as rope. Really enjoying how this looks. And then I didn't want it just to be a big open space, but rather than putting in a big rock tower to block the view, I thought we'll bring in one of the ash trees, which is probably one of my favourite trees. We're going to pop it in the middle, sink it down into the path, make it a little bit tilted as though the ground has given away underneath its weight, and then we're going to surround the area with more hedgerows and plants, much like we did on the other side. One thing I completely forgot to add into most of the zoo so far, at least in any time recently, and you all know my love for this plant, is the stinging nettle. We have not used nettles nearly as much as we should, so I'm going to make sure we get some of them in here as well. And with that, we have at least a little bit of planted entryway as you come up to the building here. For now, you'll just see a building site behind it, but next episode we will go back and do all of this outside area. For now though, we're going to jump back inside to do some final touch-ups. We're going to run a vent all the way along the edge of the concrete meeting the guest area, and that is just because, let's face it, it would be very messy without them. And to blend them a little bit more into the floor, we're also going to use decals to add a bit more dirt pretty much all the way along the edges of the venting, but also throughout the habitat. This is meant to be a much more realistic building. We've spent a lot more time. We've got a much longer video than normal on it. Let's make sure we add in those final details. And with that, let's see how it turned out and get some elephants into our elephant house. Well, you did not think I would talk for 20 minutes. I did not think that I could talk for 20 minutes, but here we are. It is done. As you can understand after seeing it, this is why we've had to split it into a two-part episode. For now, I am really happy with all the details that we've got in. The elephants look great in here. I have very recently put in Planet Zoo Plus, so we've got a lot more interactivity because the elephants are not as constrained by their hitboxes. Big recommendation for that mod. I don't really think there's much more to say though, to be honest. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, tippy tap that like button. If you're not subscribed, make sure you click the subscribe button and pop a comment down below about what you think of our final area to the riverbanks section of the zoo, our entrance animals, and our big showcase, or what will be our big showcase, of the Asian elephant. However, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to get started on next week's episode, and I will see you then when we finish this all off. Goodbye.